Welcome. I'm Ron Baker, Director of the Canadian Small Church Ministry Centre, sponsored by Small Church Connections. And this is us, Canadian Small Churches in Action podcast. Today we have a special guest, actually coming from just south of the border, across a lake. You could probably no, you probably wouldn't want to swim.
I can't swim it.
No, I wouldn't bother. Lake Erie is a little ways to go. So, but nevertheless, living in a small town. Well, I'm going to let him introduce himself. Just if you don't mind, just give your name and a little bit of your ministry background, how you've gotten to where you've gotten, and then we're just going to jump into a very interesting topic. But I'm not going to tell you about what that is yet. We'll see. Here we go.
Sure. My name is Kyle Boone, 32 years old. I pastor at Hamden Congregational Church. I've been here almost 6 years. We are in Northeast Ohio. So basically drive northeast out of Cleveland, Ohio until you run out of suburbs and you'll hit where I live. That's where we live. Before I was here, I was actually in Dallas, Texas when I was doing seminary work, and I was a youth pastor at Schofield Memorial Church. But really, I've been doing ministry since I was 16 years old. I've been doing weekly Bible studies and things of that nature, chaplaincies. So a lot of kind of different ministry experience, but been doing that since I was 16, and local pastor ministry since about 6 years ago.
And you're in a congregational church, is that right?
A congregational church, yeah. So one of the really old churches in the area, 1809 is when it was founded.
Oh, wow. Yeah. You've got 200 years of experience behind you.
That's right. That's right.
always fun to work with that. And which brings up we were just discussing before, but I'll just go a little bit into it. The changing attitudes and approaches within our society have really made a difference. And I was thinking back even to the 40 years, 50 years ago when I was in ministry and dealing with domestic abuse situations. Now, my understanding is you've done some study in this area, and I'm just really interested to see, to talk a little bit about that, why churches should be concerned about domestic abuse and maybe some of the changes that have happened over the last number of years as we approach that.
Sure. Yeah, this is one of those issues. You need to know about it because it's going to happen. The stats are 1 out of every 4 women sometime in their life will experience domestic abuse. So, I mean, let's say you got a church of 50 persons. You say, we're just a small town church. We're just a small church. Well, in a small church, about 60% of your congregation are women. That'd be about 30 women. That means about 7 of them sometime in their life are going to experience domestic abuse, and 3 are probably going through it right now. So this is an issue that I didn't seek out. It found me. And so it's one of those things where you can put it off until somebody's calling you on the phone saying, hey, this just happened. The police arrested my husband. Come help. And then you're thrown into it. So that's really my experience of how I got introduced into it. And then after I got involved in it, I did studying on it at the doctorate level and was doing some research on it. And then as I kept talking about it, it kept finding me. And so I would talk to more people and deal with more cases on it. So yeah, it's coming for you, whether you'd like it to or not. And because of the changing culture, I think it's being discussed more today. I think there was a time when maybe, you think of the 50s or 60s, you kind of swept that under the rug. Mom and dad deal with it at home. We don't really talk about that out in public and turn a blind eye to it. But today's culture, the Me Too culture, everybody's discussing this. And unfortunately, it's one of those words, abuse, that gets hijacked, and it means a million different things to a million different people. Everything is called abuse. And when everything's called abuse, how can you really define it?
So let's start there. Let's talk a little bit about defining domestic abuse and what churches are going to, what they're going to have to deal with.
Mm-hmm. So my biggest start is just be slow to speak and quick to listen. And that's biblical. So you got to listen to that one. Be slow to speak and quick to listen. I think we often miss abuse because we have this kind of preconceived notion in our mind. Domestic abuse is a physical violence problem where a woman will show up to church and she'll be black and blue under the eyes. And so that's what we're looking for. And if we don't see that, we think that's not a problem. Some of us think, it's an anger problem, that there's people, they just get angry and they need to work on anger. So what I found is helpful. What is abuse? Abuse is a type of behavior that people engage in. There's different ways that it's defined. The way I defined it, it's a punishing pattern for power over another.
Mm.
Some call it toxic entitlement. Some call it oppression, kind of coming on the biblical language there. But the idea is this: somebody is going to punish somebody else until they get what they want. It's about getting what I want, when I want it, no matter what I need to do to get it. So I always give an analogy. Let's say a husband and a wife are going out on a hot day, and the husband forgets his water bottle, but the wife remembered to bring her water bottle.
Hmm.
And so the husband might say, "Oh, like, I'm really thirsty. Can I have your water?" And she goes, "Oh, sure, you can have a drink of my water." Well, let's say the next time they're gonna go out, she reminds him, "Hey, make sure you bring your water bottle today." And they go out again, and he forgets his water bottle. "Hey, I want to drink your water bottle." And she goes, "Honey, I reminded you, like, you need to remember." And then all of a sudden it's, "Wow, you're so selfish. Here you
Mm.
are in a relationship with me, and you say you love me, and you say you care about me, and you won't even let me have a drink of water." And so then she gives in, she feels bad, and then it happens again. And this time, he starts as usual, and it's not working. And wow, look at you! You call yourself a Christian, and you don't even think about your husband. And so he elevates that guilt. Eventually, that stops working, and she says, "No, like, listen, I told you, I'm not a bad wife. I try to remind you. I try to get ready for you." And then he starts yelling, "Give me the water bottle now."
Yeah.
And so what you see is abuse is a spectrum. It's about how can I get what I want, and I'll use whatever tactics I need to get there. It always starts emotional, but then often it can escalate into other areas, financial, sexual, and then of course physical is what we
Right.
are most accustomed with. So that's kind of what abuse is. Abuse is really, it's this pattern where somebody, high 90% of the time it's the male. Yes, can women abuse men? That can happen, but it's almost always men to women,
Hmm.
uh, where they will use their position of power to punish somebody to get what they want when they want it. And so there's really no need to escalate the level of abuse if you can get what you want using lesser means.
Hmm.
But the idea is it's this whole power play dynamic. That's what's at stake in an abusive relationship, is that I will manipulate and punish you in order to get what I want. It's a very self-serving, it's a pride-centered relationship.
I I have run across that so many times, um, but yet I think I'm one of those that maybe naivety is the word, or maybe we just haven't. Okay, how do you help churches, pastors, and I'm thinking particularly in a small church where, yeah, as you say, this is not only is it possible and quite probable that something's happening, but you're working in a small church where the relationships are what it's all about.
Mhm.
Um, how do you step in there? How do you know? How do you give us some more thoughts on some of that?
Yeah. So unfortunately, immediately we enter into the conversation as thoughts about, abuse and divorce, or
Mhm.
because again, like I said, in this scenario, you can have abuse on a minor level where it's just somebody who's really selfish and they always use put me down to get what they want. That's not the same as somebody killing the family pet because they want to get what they want. And
Yeah.
that kind of stuff happens. And so what you're really there's several things we're trying to do. The first thing we're called to do as pastors is to make disciples.
Hmm.
That's what we're called to do. So any kind of this toxic entitlement should be off limits. Granted, we're all humans who are sinners, and pride is at the root of every one of our sins. And so all of us at times will act abusively. Um, so when we're talking about abusive relationships, what we're talking about those is two things: the severity of the abuse and the
Hmm.
frequency with which it occurs.
Okay.
So you're looking for the frequency of which it occurs and the severity of the punishing tactics that are being used. Because, like I said, sometimes I talk to groups about this, and good husbands will come like, "I'm an abusive husband,"
Yeah.
and I'm like, "Well, yeah, probably at times you are, but that's not characteristic of your life. I mean, all of
Mhm.
us act selfishly and manipulatively, and so unfortunately, I think the secular world has hijacked that and say, 'Oh, it's abuse, it's abuse.' Well, like, maybe so, but the word can be so overused that it loses the what we're really going for here is when it gets such a toxic level where it's happening frequently, and it's happening in a severe sort of way. And so this is what we most commonly think of when we think of abuse, as in marriages, of when does it get really serious? When do we need to do something about it? Does that kind of help you unpack what I'm talking about
Yeah,
here?
yeah. In fact, that's very helpful. Is to say, we're there. If you want to put it, there's a scale, in one sense, that we're working at, and we need to look at that and say where are we at? As you
Mhm,
say, the idea is holiness, or in other words, being completely like God,
mhm,
means that we immediately see our imperfections, because we are all selfish.
mhm.
That I get that, but that severity in that there seems to be intervention. What should a church be doing to help in that whole area with when you encounter a case where you say, hey, yeah, this is domestic abuse?
Okay. So, as we think through that, again, the main thing is, okay, we're setting a healthy culture of what does it look like? And unfortunately, when we think of a lot of, let's just say, popular charismatic pastors and leaders, we go back to that biblical injunction, uh, don't domineer the flock.
Okay, yeah.
What's it saying? Don't be an abusive personality, who I will, and if you violate me, you violate the man of God, this spiritual authority. And so we need to create churches where we don't model that kind of behavior, where we model
uh
gentleness, humility, love. Those are the kind of things that we want to model. But what you're asking, okay, so what happens when you suspect something has been severe? I think the first thing, again, you do is you have to listen. One of the things that kind of we think we'll be able to detect it right away.
hmm
We think, man, if this was happening in my church, I would know it. These stats cannot be right. That's
right.
what we think. 1 out of 4, like, these are just these people who call every little thing abuse. This isn't happening that much. Here's the problem. You probably are not going to notice it. And let me tell you why. Victims don't know they're being oppressed. Now, I'm not talking about, we convince people they have something they don't. I mean, they truly don't realize it. This has become so normalized in their relationship with their spouse, and they don't share it with anybody, that they don't realize, yeah, normal spouses don't make you walk home at 2 in the morning from a hotel.
hmm
They don't realize normal spouses don't just break furniture when they get upset. But this becomes such a normal pattern in their life that they become desensitized to it. So the victims don't necessarily know they're being oppressed. They just know they don't feel right and that their husband gets angry. And they often feel like they're the ones to blame. Almost always, abusers are master manipulators. And so the women think they're the reason why. It's my fault. If I was a better wife, then they would just act differently. And unfortunately, pastors, we're trained in marital counseling. And how do you deal with a healthy marriage? Well, he brings a little bit of a problem and she brings a little bit of a problem, and let's work on both of our problems and strive together. The problem with abuse is it's not a sin of misunderstanding. It's not a sin of two people who are trying to work in a loving relationship, selflessly loving each other. It's that one person is a manipulator who wants everything to go their way. And so if we think about a sin like theft, okay, we have to know what kind of sin we're dealing with.
hmm
In theft, a woman walks out in public and someone grabs her purse and steals it. What we wouldn't say to the woman is, wow, we got to think about what both of you brought to the table here. Yeah, it was wrong for him to rob you, but you shouldn't have been carrying a purse with so much
right.
money. We wouldn't do that. And unfortunately, that's what we often do in marital counseling, because that's how we're trained. We just kind of go into this mode that we're all sinners, which is true, that we
Mhm.
all bring problems to the marriage, which is true. But the lie is that if I would just act differently, he wouldn't abuse me.
Right.
That's not the problem. The problem is he's in love with himself. The problem is that he's willing to hurt other people to get what he wants when he wants it. And so no amount of capitulation on the woman is going to help that. In fact, it only reinforces his love for himself. And so that's really the problem. It's James 4. What causes quarrels and fights among you? Is it not this, that your passions are at war within you? You desire and you don't have, so you murder. You covet and you can't obtain, so you fight and you quarrel. So the victims don't know they're being oppressed.
hmm
And then the oppressors, those who are actually doing it, they think they're just. they're so into themselves. They often think themselves the victim. They often have kind of pity parties for themselves. Like, well, the only reason I get angry is because, if you knew what kind of wife she was, you would get angry too. And so these are the kind of things that come up. He doesn't think he's oppressing. He thinks he's just in his anger. Everybody who's ever angry does think they're just in their anger. That's the nature of being angry, is that you think justice was violated. That's why
Yes,
you're angry.
it's all
The
about
problem,
justice. Yes.
yeah, the problem is the anger of man doesn't produce the righteousness of God. Um, Abusers are also master manipulators. Here's what's really scary. A lot of times we have this kind of suspicion. Abusers are, they live in a trailer park with a cut off shirt, and they're kind of grungy and they're mean, and they're a lot of abusers, lawyers, doctors, men's ministry leaders, Sunday school teachers. I mean, even in my own experience, I don't want to get into too much because if someone watches this, but I have people who are in ministry, and you wouldn't believe the stories that come out on the other side. And these people are master manipulators. They're really sometimes charismatic people, and they'll go and they'll befriend you, and they'll befriend networks of community. And so even in your small church, it's not necessarily safe for the woman to come out and say. Imagine if one deacon or one elder on your board was abusing his wife. Would she feel comfortable talking to you after you've been friends with this guy for so long?
Exactly.
Um,
Yeah.
it's very dangerous. So, um, a lot of times it's going on, and we'll never find out. The other illustration I give is try to imagine living with a terrorist. Okay. Try to imagine if you live with a terrorist, and you would think, why wouldn't you just tell me if you live with a terrorist and that he was threatening you? Well, what if the terrorist finds out you told people and they don't believe you? One of the scariest thoughts is if I go to my pastor and I tell him this, and he says to me, you know what, I just don't believe what you're saying, and you need to work it out. And then they go home and the husband is furious, and that only is going to escalate the violence. Um, what if the law doesn't protect you? You go to the law, especially in small towns, if there's a network where the police are friends with the husband and they all know each other and they grew up together and they're cousins. What if he threatens to harm your children? Um, what if he's convinced you this is normal and you're the crazy one? You're the one who's causing you to do this. You're abusive. That's often the critique is, well, you're abusive too, um, because they can create and evoke these
Yeah.
responses
Yeah.
out of their wives. So uh, there's this guy named Lundy Bancroft. He does, when people get into these kind of court cases, sometimes they're sentenced to come to him, the men, to kind of have some a domestic abuse recovery. And he writes this. He says, among my clients, I've had numerous doctors, including 2 surgeons, many successful business people, owners and directors of large companies, about a dozen college professors, several lawyers, a prominent radio personality, clergy people, 2 well-known professional athletes. One of my violent clients has spent every Thanksgiving for the past 10 years volunteering at his local soup kitchen.
Hmm.
Another was publicly visible staff member of the major international human rights organization. The cruelty and destructiveness that these men were capable of would have stunned their communities had they known. And so again, we can think that of course we would be able to see this stuff, but there's several reasons why we might not. And baseline theology, you're not omniscient. You're not omniscient. And the verse I live by now with counseling this kind of thing is, whoever states his case first seems right until another comes and examines it. Um, we have to be
Yep.
so patient and so careful and go so slow.
I'm going to jump into something that has been running through my mind just recently, and not in the questions that we've asked here, but just determining evangelism in a new society, in the sense that we tended to have a society where everyone understood what was wrong. It was based on Christian principles. Certainly in a North American state, that would be it. So all we had to do is bring back memories of what was right, what was wrong, what God would require, and then we've moved to a society that's much more self-centered. Dig as deep as you can, and find yourself, and that will bring you, I mean, basically make yourself God.
Mm-hmm.
What and just listening recently to a Tim Keller podcast, the idea now that we've moved into a third stage, which is a stage where we've come from guilt, and now we've moved to that idea that we make our own selves gods, so there is no sin. Only the only sin is the sin that's against myself. And now we're moving further into a state of, okay, well, if that's true, then the most important thing in life is justice. And I have to bring justice, and I'm no longer, I'm the person that is is true just, the true just person. And therefore, anything that I do must be just. What happens with abusers? And how do we approach people who would have that approach to life, that they are the true justice? Well, as you've hinted this already.
Yeah.
How do we evangelize? How do we bring them to a point of, you've talked about discipleship and many other avenues. Sorry,
Yeah.
that's goes all over.
Yeah. No, I think you're right in the cultural diagnosis. I think the good news is no matter which way we want to slice it, we can't escape the image of God inside of us.
Okay.
Everybody knows abuse is wrong. And so what the abuser does is he stifles those feelings of guilt and shame by trying to justify why it was okay that he went off on his wife.
Mm-hmm.
This is why, yeah, okay, it was wrong for me to hit her, but she really deserved it. And so they come up with ways to try to justify. And so I think really we try to find ourselves, like when I'm talking to the man, which I haven't had too many opportunities of, I have had some. It's really dicey, but you just got to shoot
Yeah.
straight. You got to be a prophet Nathan. And we trust that the image of God inside of people will convict them. The Holy Spirit will convict them. And they may not listen to that, but again, what can you do anyway? You can't, none of us can save anybody. None of us can make someone confess their guilt, but we can point to it. And we do know that because they are humans made in the image of God, that'll resonate. And so they're either going to suppress that and get angry about that, or they're going to own it. I remember at one conversation, and I was pointing to, he was justifying his anger, and I was pointing to, but you didn't have to do that. You didn't have to act. And so I kind of go back to this. Everybody's responsible for their own actions. It's 1 Corinthians 10:12-13. You won't be tempted beyond what you can handle. Where there is temptation, God will provide a way so that you may be able to escape it. God is faithful. So God can provide a way out. And usually in the church, we're talking to at least professing Christians. So that's something we can point to the Bible. As pastors, we're probably not getting too many outside cases. Now, I question whether some of these people are truly believers, but at least they're going to confess Christianity, and so we can work with that. You said no, you didn't have to. I look at Joseph in the Bible in Genesis 50, or not Genesis 50, but before then, where Potiphar's wife's there. He had every reason why he could have slept with her. He was just a slave. She wanted to. He had a hard life. He was probably emotionally distraught. But he says, this is not okay. And so he ran. And so that's what I point people to. No amount of these reasons justify sin. I'm not saying that didn't create extra temptation for you when that person was driving really poorly and it made you have road rage, but that doesn't justify your response. Everybody's responsible for their own actions. So as far as, you're right, the philosophy of this world says that this is true, but I do think deep down, the image, I kind of bank on the image of God inside of people, that we know right. And I mean, even secular people who believe there's no moral absolutes. I said, do you think abuse is wrong? Like actually wrong? And they have a hard time not saying it's actually wrong. And then they try to contrive some reason of why it's really wrong, even though they can't. But I think the image of God does us a lot of help there.
Yeah. That is okay. That's excellent. I'm okay. I hate to say this, but we're running out of time. It's gone way too fast. So I'm just going to open it up and ask, if you had one piece of advice for small church pastors regarding what we've been talking about today, what would that be?
Okay. I guess I'm going to cheat a little bit. Let me say a
Go
few
for
things
it.
quickly.
Use your notes. Yeah.
Okay. I've said this before. Be slow, be quick to listen. Okay. I think we live in a world where we're called, you got to take sides, you got to act quickly. I don't think that's true. Okay. Listen, you're listening for severity and patterns of abuse. And honestly, they're not always going to be able to articulate it. And it's going to take time. You're going to have to read things with them. If you're going to do anything quickly, here's what you ought to do. There's free downloads almost anywhere on the net of safety plans. Give a safety plan to the woman. Women know their husbands. They have an intuitive, because their whole life has been designed to respond to him. Again, think of the water bottle. They're always responding and reacting and avoiding crisis. We need to empower them because they know better than we do. We don't want to jump in and actually put them in more danger. The most dangerous time for a woman is when she's trying to leave. And so you might think, oh, I'll just jump in and pull her out of the situation. You might actually escalate it and make it worse if it's truly a dangerous situation. So what you need to do is give her a safety plan. What do I do when things turn bad? Where can I go? Do I have an extra set of car keys? If you want to do something immediately, just immediately do the safety plan. But then listen, a lot of, especially in church, they're going to want to know on divorce. Get your theology of divorce and marriage very clear. I'll just throw out mine real quick. Divorce is not a sin, but it's not good. So divorce can sometimes be the lesser of two evils. The reason I don't believe divorce can be a sin is because God commanded divorce in Ezra 10. So if God commands divorce, I don't think God can command something that's a sin. God divorces Israel in Jeremiah and Isaiah. Now, Jesus tells us often people get divorced, and it is a sin because they're basically trying to justify their adultery. I'm going to divorce my spouse and marry somebody else I prefer to be with. And they might even throw around the word abuse. And so we need to walk carefully and slowly with that. But we also want to be careful we don't value institutions over people. Sometimes these marriages just go bad. And that's the whole reason I think God allowed for it in the law is sometimes marriages just go bad. And it can be the lesser of two evils sometimes. So get clear, whatever you believe the Bible teaches, get clear on your theology of divorce. And then remember, as a pastor, you can't do everything. Okay, you can't possibly give all the counseling this person needs. You have, we want to leave the 99 for the one, but the problem is the other 99 aren't found. They're also lost in your church. They need your help. You got other responsibilities, and this can totally consume you. And so you have to be very careful, be wise, never counsel somebody in a vulnerable situation alone, one-on-one. Bring in other women in your church to do this. And then remember, the most important thing you do is you speak for God, pastor. 1 Peter 4, one who speaks should speak as if he speaks oracles of God. When you stand up in the church and you think about your illustrations, think about how often we talk about maybe homosexuality, which affects a much less percent of the population than domestic abuse. Bring some more of those illustrations in. Shape the culture of your church, because you have women out there who need to hear it. You have men out there who need to hear it and be challenged. And then you have children. They don't know how to choose between mom and dad. And so what you say can often be the tiebreaker into knowing what's right and what's wrong. And that affects the next generation. Children, boys who see their men treat their wives this way, statistically are likely to do it. Women who see mothers treated this way are statistically more likely to get into relationships like their mother is. And so you can change the culture of the church even by addressing it in church, just in simple ways that, hey, if you need a safe place to talk, I'll listen to you. Doesn't mean you have to judge right away who's in the right, who's in the wrong. When a woman wants to know, do you believe me? You can just say, hey, I have no reason not to believe you, but I need to move slowly and carefully. And so I'd like to meet again. You don't have to give your definitive answer right away.
Excellent thoughts. I am, as I said, unfortunately, we're coming down to that time that we're done.
Yeah.
And there's so many other questions I'd love to ask, but certainly this is a great place to start. And so on behalf of myself and those that are listening, thank you. Just thank you very much for what you provided.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me on.